Welcome back to Shift Happens. I'm Blair Hicken, and we're here to show where leaders share real stories about modernizing how their businesses run. Today, I'm joined by Mark Crompton. He's a fractional CRO and sales acceleration advisor based just outside of Chicago. After leading global software organizations and reporting to private equity boards, he now works with mid market companies in helping them modernize their sales infrastructure, implement accountability, and drive measurable growth. It's great to have you on board here, Mark.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So, in your experience and your background, you've run some global software companies, and you now operate as a fractional CRO. What drove you to make that shift, and how has being in a global software company helped you in the mid market community?
Well, it's really helped me to understand the importance of a business, how to expand your distribution, your sales. So after, as you said, about 25 or 30 years in wireless telecom, I really decided to branch off and focus really on growth and sales growth. And that's kind of what I do with sales acceleration. I really look for companies that need help improving their sales performance, growing their team, or maybe helping them document it for future growth. So sales acceleration, we're just a group of about 200 of us, fractional chief revenue officers and sales consultants that really do focus on that kind of semi middle market company, the 5 million, the kind of 50 million area. Although we always have exceptions. There's always the
Yeah,
startup you work with, or there's a
right.
larger client that you get, introduced to, which is great. But that's kind of our sweet spot. I work currently with about 2 to 4 clients a year on kind of annual contracts.
Okay.
I do some work kind of on demand, smaller 1 to 3 month projects to help people out in specific areas. But really my goal is to work with a client over a complete sales cycle to really help them grow their sales. And my track record usually is if I'm brought in and we kind of go through our magic and implement our recipe, we really expect 25% or better growth year over year. And I'm proud to say I've actually achieved that the last couple of years.
That's a great measurable. So that's a great expectation, when you're talking to those opportunities, but also to have the real world facts at the end of it. So
It's not easy.
congratulations.
It's a lot of work. And I won't say, I do go in and I target that 25%, but I'm fortunate. I had one client last year that grew 38%, which was fantastic, 127. But, 25% is kind of like my target as a minimum that when I engage with a client.
Great. And so when you are first brought into these, mid market companies, is there an analysis stage where you sort of go in and try to, find out where they're at before you start looking forward?
Well, hopefully I've done a little bit of that before they engage me as part of
Right.
the discovery process. So I try to go in there knowing a little bit about the business, but I will tell you, every engagement's different. And I always like to look back. God, I wish I knew this when I first started 30 days ago as part of the assessment. But you're right. That first 30 days is really going in there trying to meet the people, understand what they're doing today, see what's working, what's not working. Of course, I have about 11 different areas I look at automatically as part of our growth model, but really trying to get to understand the people, do a lot of one-on-ones. I'll do ride-alongs with the sales team if I need to. That's always a good one to build a little bit of a bond with the team. But you're right. In the beginning, there's kind of an assessment period and then a couple week takeaway to try to build a plan out of what do we need to do.
Okay. And do you see some, consistent patterns with, this type of client, or is everyone very different in sort of their stage and how they're led? I've often found that
Yeah.
when working with clients, if the founder or the, lead came into the role on a sales side, then the sales side might be more mature than the operational side. But likewise, if the leader came from the operational side, then the sales side might be the one that needs more work.
I definitely see that, and it takes you a little while to figure that out. The other thing I will say is most of my engagements, and not intentionally, have some element of a family theme to them.
Okay.
Either they were founded by a family member or a very strong entrepreneur, or it's a second generation that took over it. You kind of got to figure out kind of, the relationship and connection of the current staff.
Right.
I've had ones with ex-wives are involved,
Yeah.
brothers, sisters. Father was a sales guy. He founded the company, all kinds of exciting thing like that. But they definitely have a different flavor from company to company. Some do have an operational kind of sweet spot. Some are, well, maybe they're a little bit better on the marketing and not the operational side. But when I go in there, there's a couple of things I start looking at. And one is, do they really have a plan? Believe it or not, that sounds like so basic, but it's like, do they have a plan? Well, what are they doing this year? How are they attacking the market? And some of them don't have a plan. Some of the indicators you'll start to see is nothing's written. There's no sales playbook. That's always a good one. Uh, I've seen sales teams, and this is another shocker, that have no online presence. You know,
Yeah,
I've had sales teams where none of the sales guys had LinkedIn profiles,
right,
but they're still doing 35, $40 million a year and very profitable.
right,
But they don't have online presence. They don't have a CRM, right? Where are they saving all their customer information? Well, it's either upstairs or it's in an Excel spreadsheet. Or I think we did that a couple years ago, or talk to accounting, they'll pull, our invoices, they have all the contact
right.
information there.
Or they start searching their email client for previous engagements, right?
Yeah. So, those are some of the indicators, on the front end right away that let me know, where they're at. Beyond that, I would look into things like, do they have a methodology to go to market? Do they do any online marketing? All real quick, you'll figure out what they're doing. Those are the indicators. I get that off the bat. Usually when I engage with a client, I get an initial data download. I have a list that I give them of all the different stuff I want to look at. And then probably like you need a week or two just to go through all the data, assuming they had it all on the front end.
Right. Follow up on all the things that they didn't deliver from your list. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good indicator. Then, like I said, I take that, I go into my model. Depending on how engaged I am with my client, sometimes I'm in the back office, kind of putting the infrastructure together for their sales leader and implementing it through their sales leader. Sometimes I'm in there as the VP of sales.
Okay.
But regardless, some of the basics, beyond the sales plan would be, are they doing weekly or biweekly sales meetings? We follow an L10 format with our kind of brother sister company, EOS. So we have an L10 agenda that we kind of go through on a weekly or biweekly, depending upon the business. But if I had to say one thing I don't see a lot of sales teams implementing from a sales management perspective is weekly one-on-ones. You know, got to get with every sales guy on a weekly one-on-one. Block out an hour. If you only need 5 minutes, you do 5 minutes. If you need only 15, do 15, but block out an hour and go through what that rep's KPIs are. You know, how many clients should they have contacted that week? Existing, new, should they have been on the road? How many proposals did they put together? So, really holding people accountable on a weekly basis for, those KPIs that are part of your sales plan, and looking at your 30, 60, 90, and how you're going to get to the end goal, which is usually an annual sales target.
Right. Well, it sounds like you really go through that people process systems analysis. Which one of those do you think is the one that you tend to drill down more or find a gap or a way to significantly improve of those three?
Well, if I had to go back, I would say I would go back to, again, my theme is always try to do more with less. And usually when I come in, the first pushback I get from the sales team is like, I don't have time to do that. I'm already maxed out. I have no more bandwidth. I'm trying to, make hunters out of farmers sometimes, right? And I don't have time. I'm entering orders. That's the priority. So you've got to give those salespeople additional time to be able to do more hunting or outreach. And that's where, the outbound AI marketing tools come into play, the email tools where you can do batch messaging, whether it's an Engage, a MailChimp, Constant Contact, one of those, and then bringing it all together in a CRM, being able to track where each opportunity is at or client, where you're at on your proposals or putting the proposals together. So I would say implementing these tools and starting to automate your system, even small AI tools like note takers, which I'm sure you're using right now, right?
Right.
If you have two or three, 4 meetings a day and you're not using a note taker, right away, you're going to save, at least in the way I work, 15 to 30 minutes a day, retyping your notes, sending them out, distributing them, folding them. So you can start to implement these tools and really save the team time that they can then invest into more outbound sales and marketing activities.
Yeah, I
So
agree that
you try to not overburden them. You try to free up a little bit of time and then use that time more efficiently.
right. Yeah. Your example of the note taker is a great one because, invariably you get rushed and you don't make enough notes. And it just by having that automation there and it automatically updates your CRM with those notes, then the next meeting you have with that opportunity just helps move it forward that much faster because you fully recall the last discussion and what the pain points were or what the pushback was from the opportunity, and it just gives you a discussion point to move the whole game forward.
Yeah, and you save yourself 15 to 30 minutes a meeting or a call. And then you start looking at other AI tools, the chat GPTs, the Claudes, customer letter. You can generate a customer letter, in 5 minutes that would have taken you 30 to 45 minutes in the past when you go through and edit it and correct it. Um, I was working with a sales team last week and we were going to a trade show. And one of the sales guys took the lead on a trade show and he had to manage the portal and fill out like the 500 character description of the company. He had to write like a product summary and it had to be specific characters or number of words. I worked with him, used Chat GPT, and we were using one that already had the playbook loaded, his
Okay.
brochures loaded into it, their website loaded. So in the first pass with one prompt, we were 90% done in 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's great.
So, again, these different AI tools, if sales teams aren't using them, they need to implement them immediately. You don't need a guy like me to tell you to use those.
Right.
What a guy like me does to save time starts to put them together, linking the AI outbound marketing tool with the email tool, the
Mhm.
MailChimp or whatever, which is integrated with the CRM,
Right.
which is integrated to do messaging that's already been checked through Chat GPT for optimum connectivity, and it automatically connects them with LinkedIn. Get there. So sales acceleration has a model we call the three-phase model where it's kind of like a child. A child crawls, walks, and runs.
Right.
So in that crawl, it's kind of using standalone meeting takers, Chat GPT, your CRM, maybe your ERP. Then when you start to connect a couple, you're kind of walking. The child's
Okay.
getting to two or
Yeah.
three, they can walk. Then once they're walking, I want my son to be track and field down the road. You link them all together and you get to the point where the salesperson can literally open up his in basket and has a request for a meeting to talk about his products and services that he automated the outreach, automated the follow-up, automated setting up a time for a meeting, and put it into his email.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm going. I think it goes back to the original theme. You said, how to do more with less
Right.
and incorporating technology and, the tools really can save you a lot of time, which is the number one asset a sales guy has is his
Yeah.
time.
Well, and in our earlier discussions, you'd mentioned that you often bump into clients that are running some legacy systems and sort of not only are they legacy but they've sort of lived a very valuable life but they're well past that. And so is that a usual thing, something that you often run into? What makes transitioning off those legacy systems so difficult for these clients before you get there?
Well, it's a very good point. I think that's, months ago, that's what originally brought us together is that, these legacy systems that these companies are using and very successful with them. One comes to me as FileMaker, and there's other ones out that have been around, for 20, 30 years. They're great tools. They still work. They're not as efficient as the current or modern ones. They don't have AI interface to be able to mine them, but they do the basics. But what I find with my clients is that, now we want to incorporate an AI an engine on the front. We want to connect the CRM. All right. We want to connect their phone so they can scan business cards and automatically put them in there, not have to type them into, it looks like an Excel file, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem with these legacy systems. You get to a point, they start to hold you back. And then when you get there, you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because it's not just the money. I mean, it's just not on the shelf. You pick it up, you buy it and say, implement this, and we're getting rid of, this XYZ ERP system.
Right.
You got to plan for it.
Yeah.
There's a pain threshold you got to go through.
Yes.
Do a quick story. I drive Hondas. I took my Honda to the dealer a couple weeks ago, and when I got there, instead of going up to dropping the car off and going up to the service manager and having them type in all my info, they now have iPads, and they were going around the car taking pictures. Like, Mark, we implemented this new system where everything's here. We don't have to go to the counter. Everything will be done here, and it'll be faster for you. And I said, "Oh God, this is going to be bad." So I gave him my coupon. Right, I had a coupon. He's like, "Well, what's your phone number? All this. We'll automatically call you when it's ready. It'll be washed, all ready for you." Well, long story short, I never got a phone call when it was ready.
Yeah.
It wasn't washed when I picked it up. The price was wrong because I didn't use the coupon. Oh, my point is even, one of the largest Honda dealerships in the Chicagoland area trying to implement tools is going through that pain of going from the old legacy system that was slow but it worked to the newer system that, is very cool, all on iPad. You got everything there. I can send you the PDF, all of that. There's that pain that you go through. And sometimes in my mind, that's more costly than the upfront money. And as you know,
Yeah.
it takes time to implement it correctly.
Yeah, the whole change management and then, the ongoing for the first probably, 6 to 8 months, the ongoing training and review of processes. Because if you leave the end users to their own when you introduce a new system, and you don't continually do, change management and training, then they will fall back to Excel based, management. It's easy to use. They can sort of work around whatever the new rules are in the system. So it's certainly something to you have to keep an eye on.
And it's an educational process. I mean, it's them, and I figured out that it wasn't necessarily afraid to use them, but they didn't pick up on the training as fast. They felt uncomfortable moving around software. So I actually spent a couple weeks working with him and walking him through a couple of them to get them more comfortable. And usually when they see the benefit at the end, they're like, okay, I will learn this one way or another. And they cooperate to a higher level. But there definitely is pushback sometimes on maybe more of your legacy stuff.
Yeah. So how do you balance both you and then with your clients? How do you balance the road mapping and planning of these, system replacements or automations versus ripping off the band-aid and just committing?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of our model of this crawl, walk, run.
Hmm.
Kinda implement one at a time in a standalone mode. So, back to original, use the meeting note taker by itself. Get that working. Get the PDF. Use the Chat GPT by itself. The CRM, use it standalone, and then get everything working independently, then start to try to connect one thing at a time. Maybe you connect with the CRM, the outbound AI marketing tool. It could be Zoom Info, Seamless AI. It could be Knowledge Net. And maybe you start with one feature at a time of that AI tool. I find somebody with my ICP or my ideal customer profile, my buyer persona, and I take maybe 10 at a time and I take them into my CRM. I'm not going to do 100. I'm gonna watch them very closely. I'm gonna enter them, make sure everything's done right, the email's correct, the phone number, and then slowly build on that. So it's kind of like, a little spoonful at a time to put these together. But I will say this, the tools are getting better every day.
Yeah.
There's more APIs available. There's even APIs that help you put things together like Zapier, Zapier. If you ever Zapier. Um, they're getting better, and now, I just looked at another CRM the other day, and it automatically had an API for the outbound AI tool. So all you do is
Right.
click it and interface the two of them, and the outbound AI tool with your ICP and your buyer persona, you would automatically drop those contacts and fully populate them into the CRM.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the tools are getting better, and now if you look at some of the CRM tools, the Chat GPT is built into it, right?
Yeah.
Or the
Right.
Gemini or the Claude.
Yeah.
Or it's built into the outbound tool on the front end. Everybody's putting an AI assistant into their tools, right?
That's right.
How many AI assistants do we all have? We probably have 4 or 5 if you add in Gemini and Copilot and all those, right?
Right. Yep.
So the tools are getting better. The interface between them is getting better. And I think it's getting to the point where it's almost kind of DIY. I mean, which is fine with me. Taking that off my plate would be great. I mean, it's a lot of work putting that together. I have to bring in experts like, yourself for the ERP system, but they're getting easier and easier to put together. And I would say maybe a little bit of a better process.
I agree, and I also sort of see in 2025 there's a lot of experimentation by individuals, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing in 2026 is more organizations or departments are sort of taking that experimentation and now turning it into a standard process or trying to. Um, but there is a level of concern or discussion that's sort of been going around that now that individuals, sort of those early, keeners who's played around in 2025, now have individual AIs doing some processes, but now taking that to a team or to the full organization, there's AI legacy debt. And because, every month, every 2 weeks, these AI tools get better and better. If you don't go back and review what you designed even 6 months ago using the AI tool, it could be doing something very different than what you anticipated just because the language model has improved and its
Right.
capabilities have improved. Or, like you'd mentioned, now the CRM has its own built in model, right? And so it understands the fields in the CRM and where to go research those. And so using some of those built in AI models might be more advantageous in the application than
Hmm.
extracting it out, running it through chat, which doesn't necessarily know your 10 fields, 10 custom fields in your CRM that are important to your business profile.
Point.
Yeah.
It's
So,
exciting that, they're changing. I mean, even for me, if I finish like a sales playbook for a customer, I have to update that every year.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
everything's just changing. So I am completely agree and understand.
So when you're doing these sales playbooks, are you now starting to reference in that playbook where you might introduce AI and like giving them suggestions on here's a playbook that you can do manually, but here would be a great place to use chat or, use Zapier to integrate something, or maybe we need to move to a stronger CRM solution so that it can do more of this. So is that part of your playbook or is that sort of where you're seeing it go?
Yeah, I actually incorporate the AI into the playbook, especially around the sales strategy
Okay.
and the sales
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
So most of the sales process, at least that I've done in the last couple years, even in my career, usually the sales process is usually around 4 or 5 to 8 steps. What I do is I document in our playbooks, and it's part of sales acceleration's process, is how to use those tools in each of those processes. Now, what I've found is that there's a lot of different tools out there. I mean, especially the CRMs, you know, there's, I don't know, I could probably name off 20 if I really had to. And each one kind of has a different application, it's better in different markets. So what I've done in the past is worked with other consultants that specialize in that area and trying to match them with the right tool for their customer profile, their business segment, their sales process, and then document that as part of the process.
Oh, that's good.
And then usually when we implement those tools, you always try to involve some form of a training package. And definitely in the front end. I mean, you probably know this better than I, but normally people only need help kind of in the first few weeks or month and they figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your support is kind of front loaded.
Right. Yeah.
Once they get off and running, they're good to go. But back to the original question, yeah, I build in the use of those tools and the processes really as part of that sales process. And then I kind of break it out within the sales process between pre-sales funnel and sales funnel. And then I build it up to the point where a lot of times the CRM will go into an ERP system. You can try to put ERP features into the more enterprise type of CRMs, the Salesforces of the world. As you know, it's very costly. Customization is a lot of work. So what I found, if I had to characterize the majority of my clients, if they have a good ERP system, we try to use that and just figure out at what point the sales process moves the sales qualified lead or the SQL from the sales funnel into the ERP system, usually for proposal generation and tracking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you convert that to an order. But
Right.
again, I put the tools in there as part of the process, which is in the playbook. What's great
Yeah.
about the playbook is you get a new salesperson aboard. whether it's somebody internal that moved over from another department or you brought somebody in that onboarding plan, the sales playbook really does help you bring those people aboard faster. You're not just the sales team, but also understanding the company and the model and your customer profile. But it really does help for that onboarding process. And if you think about it, I'm sure we've all done onboarding with new employees. Historically, it was you've got to shadow a sales guy for a while,
Right.
shadow an operations guy, go shadow accounting for a
3
couple of
months
days.
later, you try to get them productive. Right.
And it's time, right? It's time. It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh god, I wanna help that new guy, but I don't have the time." So the sales playbook is a great way, whether they do it before day 1 or you give it to them when they come in and finish their HR onboarding, it really brings them up to speed fairly fast.
Right.
The other thing that's good about the sales playbook is that it's great to share with third parties. So if your accounting team is redoing their banking relationship for, line of credit or loans or a legal engagement or a CPA, instead of explaining the business to them, you can really give them that sales playbook and they understand the history, the sales team, the sales goals, where they're going. So it's a great tool to have in-house.
Yeah. No, I liked your discussion around, the handoff between the CRM side and the ERP side, because it's often a discussion that we have about, what is the system of record at each step of the onboarding process, right? And so making sure that the whole organization knows that the example would be lead opportunity management up until signed contract is CRM based. Soon as there's a signed contract, the order gets submitted to ERP, and now all of the controls around ERP and credit and all of that are now managed in the ERP. Because, like you say, trying to make your CRM invoke all the ERP and accounting rules is an expensive venture. So choose where you want things to sit.
What I also like about the ERP systems, if I look back 20 years ago to some of the ERP systems I implemented when I was at Hewlett Packard or General Electric, Man X, these huge enterprise systems, they didn't have good CRM or customer interface modules back in the day. They were so focused on operation. Now, a lot of times, like we've talked before, I'll look at an ERP system first, which is the priority for the business, and they all have CRM add-ons or
Yeah,
interfaces. So
right,
instead of starting at the CRM that we used to do in the past for the sales team, we're really going back and saying, let's look at the ERP system, where that's going, and what capabilities does that have to work with the CRM?
right.
So
Yeah,
you kind of reverse the model. In my mind, we kind of reversed it from the legacy way sales teams would look at CRMs.
yeah, yeah. So if someone wanted to modernize their sales function, what do you think is one of the first things that needs to be in place?
I had to pick one thing and I would focus on. I would focus really on what is your sales plan for the year? What are your goals? I would focus going back to some of my EOS models, your 30, 60, 90-day planning with your KPIs for the 30, 60, 90, and how that ties into your annual plan. And then as part of that sales planning process, you build in reviews, KPIs, all centered around what your plan and goal is for the year. I think, this is my opinion, too many companies that I engage with, they're doing the status quo. They just do what they did last year. It's like, "Well, we wanna grow sales." Well, okay, go get some sales training or let's hire one more sales guy. That's not how you grow the sales. You gotta put together a plan and look at all the different aspects, but, you gotta get away from that status quo, and I'll tell you, we talked about this earlier, I think one of the best things you can do is start out at the beginning of the year where you get everybody together, not just sales, the whole team together, have an offsite strategy meeting, and really talk through and plan all these different items.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
great.
that's annual planning is really, would be my answer, and you tie that into a sales plan.
Okay. So you now have led into my final question for today, and you probably answered one of them. It's what three things should a mid market company be focused on in 2026, and what makes it different from previous?
Well, I would say that you've got to continually be able to communicate on a personal level with your current clients. Tools can help doing that, but personalized communication with your customer database, your customer base. Second, making sure that you are reaching out for new clients. You gotta have new clients. If you're not growing, you're done. That's so true. I heard that. I didn't come up with that one, but that's so true. And then the last one is being able to do more with less, and that's where you start looking at tools like we mentioned before. So I would say those 3 areas are really where you can make an impact this year going forward.
That's great to hear. So, thank you, Mark, for joining today. I think it's been a great conversation talking about how mid market companies can grow, and things to be focused on in their sales cycle and just, up modernizing both their sales process and then just their whole technology stack. It was really great talking to you.
Well, thanks, Blair. Thanks for having me. It's good to talk to you as always.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.